When Runtown released Mad Over You, he had the world at his feet, literally. But almost a decade later, and he hasn't lived up to those expectations. In fact, he's reached a point where you're more likely to see him in the news for legal battles and contract breaches than you are to hear about him releasing new music. Left with one of the biggest drop-offs of any Nigerian artist, people are still wondering how it all went wrong so quickly. So, what went wrong? Well, everything. But first, let's take a look at how he made it to the top to see just how hard he fell. Born to Igbo parents, both from Enugu, Douglas Agu spent the early part of his childhood in Enugu until his father's death when he was 7. He moved to Abuja with his mother, where he spent the rest of his childhood. For him, that would be the start of his interest in music. With music came a couple of challenges, one of which was his mother's initial disagreement with his newfound interest, which made him run away from home for a while. But this turned out to be the start of his music career. He would go to the studio with friends to do some freestyling, and in time, he picked up the stage name Runtown. And yeah, it was his time to take on the world. By 2008, he and his friend Fino formed Penthouse, their new record label. He made his debut with 2 songs, Party Like It's 1980 and Activity Pikin, which were good, quite alright, but the song that put him on the radar was Galado. It featured vocals from Davido and was part of his first album, which had other hit songs like The Banger and Bedan Pause. Straight away, his unique blend of hip-hop, R&B, reggae, and rap delivered a different style in Nigerian music. It wasn't quite what people were used to, but it was good music, chart-topping music. But this presented him with a new problem. He had hits, but that didn't necessarily translate into a lot of money, which he was going to need if he wanted to be up there with the top dogs. And the obvious solution was to find someone who was interested in giving him some financial backing, like a sponsor or maybe even a new record label. That led him to Okudili Umenyora, a wealthy Nigerian businessman, CEO of Dili Motors, and someone with a long criminal history. And oh, that last bit is very important. They met through a mutual friend, Bugu Aneto Okeke, who managed Eric Many Entertainment for Dili. To Runtown, Dili seemed to tick all the boxes. He was rich, influential, owned his own record label, and most of all, he seemed to love Runtown's music. It was all he could wish for. So, he went ahead to sign a 1-year deal. His contract included a 50-50 revenue split between him and the label, but he would also have to pay Bugu 15% of his cut. At this point, it seemed like Runtown's life had changed forever. In some sense, for the better, and in others, for the worst, as you'll see later on. But first, it got better, a lot better. In November 2016, Runtown unveiled a track titled Mad Over You, and almost immediately, it made him a star. As it was tearing up the airwaves in Nigeria, the song was also tearing it up outside Nigeria. In fact, it peaked at number 38 on the Billboard Twitter Top Tracks chart, the highest a Nigerian song had ever peaked on the Billboard charts at that time. Mad Over You gave Runtown the perfect momentum he needed. Suddenly, he was getting booked for shows in places like the O2 Arena, Howard Event Center in Washington, Amazura Concert Hall in New York City, and much more. At first, it seemed like a good sign, but little did he know that his career was about to take a drastic turn, and the seeds had been sown since 2014. So, let's go back for a minute to May 2014. Off the back of a huge success with Galado, Runtown secured a deal with the record label. It seems like with the new financial backing of a label, he might just be the next big thing. That could have happened, but not when the owner of the record label isn't even that interested in you or your music. That's right. To Dili, owning a record label was more about rivaling his rich friend, E-Money, than it was about actually trying to produce the next big thing. And in the first few months of his deal with Eric Many Records, the vanity showed straight away. Dili would want Runtown to sing his name in his songs, just like KC did for E-Money. At some point, he even wanted to be a part of the creative process, but Runtown wasn't having any of that, as it wasn't part of his contract. And that would be just one of the many contract breaches. Life, as Runtown would later describe, was very unprofessional at Eric Meni. There was no structure, just Dilly running things however he wanted. In fact, Dilly loved to control things a little too much, like when Dilly called Runtown just months into his contract, asking him who had authorized his vacation to London. But that wasn't even the worst of it. When he touched down in Lagos from London, he was threatened by Dilly with a gun. That's right, a gun. Maybe next time, try to avoid a record label boss with a long criminal history. Anyway, within a few months of releasing a banger and having the entire country at his feet, he was now surrounded by a record label with a very hostile boss who only cared about two things: money and, well, being in charge. Of course, that was never going to end well. It meant that Runtown didn't get the care and development that any young artist at that stage needed so much. Instead, he was cheated several times. He rarely got any royalties on his songs and was never paid anywhere near the percentage on his contract. It was a nightmare for him. However, that wasn't enough to keep him down. Instead, he continued working on his new album, which he was to release soon, and probably hoped to leave at the end of his contract, which was just months away at that point. But Dilly wasn't going to let him go so easily. I mean, Runtown was a cash cow for him, so why lose your most prized asset when you can simply bully him into staying? And what an evil genius Dilly was. At first, he teased Runtown with a Nicki Minaj collaboration opportunity right at the end of his contract, then used that to convince him to sign a new 2-year deal. Or should I say, threaten him to sign a deal. Either way, Runtown made the biggest mistake of his career when he signed that deal. But it wasn't all that bad, at least at first. His new album was a hit, with Galado and Moneybag featuring DJ Khaled among his top songs. Little did we know that it wasn't going to be his last album, at least for another 6 years. He released his hit single Mad Over You in November 2016, and after that, he featured in a hit song with Nasty C titled Said. Now, while life at Eric Meni wasn't exactly what he wanted, Mad Over You showed how talented he was. It set the world at his feet, but you could also say it caused his downfall. I guess you're wondering how. I guess you know how artists love to milk their most successful song to the point of overkill. Well, that's what Runtown was about to do. He released a new track, For Life, which was basically Mad Over You 2.0. It had very similar beats, and the lyrics weren't all that different. And although some fans who couldn't get enough of Mad Over You liked it, it was setting him up for failure. There was no way he was going to do that forever. But it wasn't all Runtown's fault. His record label didn't help him in any way. To Dilly, the record label boss, all was good as long as Runtown kept bringing in those checks. Ultimately, Dilly's lack of music knowledge and fraudulent behavior would disrupt Runtown's career. In fact, it had in the past. Back in May 2016, Runtown made an attempt to terminate his contract with Eric Meni after many months of owed payments. What came next were lots of threats from Dilly to Runtown, and when it seemed like the threats weren't effective, he tried to appease Runtown by giving him part of his owed payments. That worked for a while until he did another show and Dilly refused to pay him. At this point, Runtown wasn't having that anymore. He left the label, and Dilly, for fear of losing his cash cow, sued Runtown and obtained an injunction against him. Seeing as it was going to be hard going up against the rich and influential label boss, Runtown reached a settlement with him out of court. But that was going to be the first of many court cases. In March 2018, just months to the end of his contract, Eric Meni Records filed a lawsuit against Runtown, accusing him of breaching his contract. The back and forth in court lasted 9 months before Runtown ultimately won the court case in January 2019. It was a big win for him, and straight away, he created his own record label, Sound God Music Group. But running a music label was no piece of cake, especially when you're an artist trying to get on your feet. Another issue was the fact that since Mad Over You, Runtown hadn't come anywhere close to those numbers. He had basically been in decline since 2016, and if there was ever a time to get back in those charts, it was now. In May 2019, he released his EP titled Tradition, which was supposed to signal a resurgence. Instead, it received the least attention of any of his projects. It was almost as if he'd been forgotten. More people probably heard of his court cases than knew of his new EP. However, Runtown wasn't one to give up so easily. He released 2 more songs that year, titled Emotions and Your Body. While these songs did okay, they weren't exactly chart toppers. But maybe the problem was that many fans had subconsciously set the bar too high for him. And after the success of Mad Over You, who can really blame them? Anyway, Runtown looked nowhere close to hitting those levels again. He released a couple of songs which didn't get much attention, except Kini Issue, which was going to be part of his 2021 album. The album, titled Sound God Fest Reloaded, was supposed to be Runtown's big comeback, a sort of statement that he was back. But was it? For one, the album was a commercial failure. And despite having some good tracks like Kini Issue and Body Rhythm, it attracted very little attention. You can't imagine the toll this must have taken on Runtown. For the sake of his own mental health and to focus more on his music, he took some time away from social media in November 2021. He would come on social media to wish his fans a happy new year, but the next time fans would see him active was in June 2022 to condemn the Owo Church attack. But by September 2022, he was back on social media fully, and he took that time to build some momentum for his new album titled Signs. Signs was to be released on December 16, but Propaganda and Things I Know, which were tracks on the album, came out earlier. With Signs, Runtown explored a new kind of style, a fusion of Afrobeats with reggaeton and dancehall elements. A bold move? Yes, but maybe that's what he needed for a long time. The album was much better than Sound God Fest. The lead single, Things I Know, was widely accepted, and overall, the album was good enough to put Runtown back on the map after becoming almost forgotten, but not enough to get him on fire again. In fact, it's not sure if Runtown will ever become as good as those 2016-17 levels, cause that back then was where Runtown used to run the streets with his music. Between his terrible choice of record label and his overcapitalizing on his hits, Runtown's lack of friends in the industry may have contributed to his decline. Besides Fino, who he knew from way back, Runtown didn't have many friends. Plus, his reserved personality made things worse for him, as he probably wouldn't have sought help even when he needed it. Basically, when Runtown was being treated like shit by his label or going through a rough patch in his career, he didn't open up to people who could have helped him. Instead, he tried to do it all alone, and in music, that's rarely possible. And his record label didn't do him any good. To Dilly, he was just a cash cow to be milked, and it's what they did. He wasn't developed or nurtured in music. Instead, he was just used to bring in check after check. Just imagine he had signed for a label like, say, Mavens. There's no telling what could have been. And when he decided to kickstart his own career independently, it was a little too late. It wasn't like Runtown was doing absolutely terrible. I mean, he was averaging thousands of views on YouTube, sometimes millions, and has 1.1 million monthly listeners on Spotify. But it seems like most of his original listeners had broadly moved on. He struggled to get people to listen to him, and even when he tried out something new, most people had moved on to newer artists out there. Today, we rarely hear much about Runtown. It's almost as if he now lives under a rock, only revealing himself once in a while. However, there are rumors of a new project in the works by Runtown. Maybe it could be just the resurgence he needs, or maybe not. We'll see about that.